area. Thank you. Hosted by the Colonial Area Anti-Racism and Social Equity Alliance. A little bit about the background of CAARSEA. CAARSEA is a fairly new group. We came into existence roughly 2 years ago after the murder of George Floyd. It started with a march attended by over 100 community members and has grown into a formal nonprofit organization, united to overcome racial injustice. We cover the Colonial Area, Whitemarsh, Conshohocken, Plymouth Meeting, and Norristown. Our goal is to ensure equitable practices and outcomes in our schools and community. And we do this by working with the police and with elected officials and with those on our school boards, who, of course, are elected officials as well. We respond directly to issues of discrimination, racism, and social inequity in our community. And we do this by raising awareness, modeling and facilitating courageous conversations, and providing resources for community learning and engagement. Starting back in February, we started this Let's Talk series to raise awareness about key issues impacting the upcoming elections, primary and general elections for 2022. We started with a program on redistricting. We spoke with Angelique Hinton of Pennsylvania Youth Vote about the impact of the youth vote in this upcoming election. And we've also talked with Mayor Yaniv Aronson, Conshohocken Borough Mayor, about his inspiration for running for public office and what does it take to take on that challenge. I'd like to point to this quote from civil rights icon, Representative John Lewis, which really speaks to the power of our vote. It is the most powerful, nonviolent tool that we have to create a more perfect union. Towards that goal of a more perfect union, I think that speaks directly to what CAARSEA is about and why we're interested in voter engagement and candidates that are seeking office. For us, it's about understanding their ability to acknowledge, address, and drive policies that support the needs of underrepresented groups by racial and sexual orientation. We focus on equity issues as they show up, whether it's in educational funding, career preparedness, over-policing of Black and Brown community members, including over-policing and high amounts of negative administrative contact in the schools, and also addressing the needs of non-native English speakers in our community. Tonight, we will be talking about the newly created 54th Legislative District, which covers Norristown, Plymouth Meeting, and Conshohocken. This area was previously serviced by Mary Jo Daley and also included Whitemarsh, which is now with Lower Merion and Narberth to make up the 148th Legislative District. One of the really exciting aspects about the newly created 54th is the diversity that's represented in our community. The 54th does not have a sitting incumbent, which meant that there was no one sitting in the area that was an elected official. Additionally, our community is made up of 50% non-white members. So it's really a microcosm of the diversity that we see in America. And it's a really great opportunity for us to make sure that we rise to the challenge of balancing the needs of all community members. Tonight, we are very fortunate to have with us Greg Scott. Greg Scott is a candidate running for representation of our district for the upcoming primary election and for the Pennsylvania House legislative seat. At this time, I am going to stop sharing and we are going to start our conversation with Mr. Scott. Greg, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the opportunity, and to your membership and your board for reaching out to me and for having this deliberative dialogue. As I shared with you before when we met a couple weeks ago, I think it's incredibly important that we create safe spaces for folks to have dialogue, especially like this with someone who's running to represent you. I'm new to many of you, and so getting out here to talk to all of you about my belief, my background, who I am, so that we can have a relationship to ensure that I have all the information I need to get started on day one is incredibly important. So thank you guys for the opportunity, and thank you for the work that you're doing with respect to the issues that you are tackling on the forefront. A lot of those issues are very sensitive to people, and you guys have taken the challenge head on, and doing it in a way that I promote, and that is by having conversations with people that don't look like you, that don't come from the same backgrounds of you, and having those safe spaces for that dialogue to happen is incredibly important, because the hardest person to hate is the person you know. So I think it's incredibly important that we have these conversations. So thank you for the platform, and thank you to your board and your members for this opportunity.
Thank you. So let's dive right in. I guess, give our community a little bit of a background about your experience in public service that you feel has prepared you for this role.
Absolutely. So public service is nothing new to me. I've been advocating for people. I think you can say probably all the way back to when I was 11 years old. I went to a doctor's appointment with my mom, who was suffering from a illness, and the doctor told her point blank that if the treatment that she needed wasn't covered by her healthcare, and that if Hillary Care passes, then it'll probably or most likely be covered under Hillary Care. And so I went home and did some research on what is Hillary Care and how can we get this to happen, because my mom was sick and she needed it. And when I turned on the 11 o'clock news that night, there was a woman by the name of Renee Chenault. I know many of you are too young to remember her, but she did a legal minute, and she talked about how the Ken Starr and his investigation that night. And prior to that 2-minute and 30-second piece that she did on that, they did about 35 seconds on Hillary Care and why it didn't pass in the Congress. And I was frustrated. And so I spent the remaining 15 minutes of the newscast from 11:15 to 11:30 writing a letter to President Clinton. And then after I wrote the letter to President Clinton, I was still furious. So I looked in the phone book for NBC 10's telephone number, and I called up the TV station at 11:35 when the news went off. And I asked to speak to Renee Chenault. And I said, and they put me through. And so I talked to Renee Chenault. It's 11:35 at night, and I'm telling her, like, listen, you just spent all this time on Ken Starr and all this stuff, the president's personal life. My mom is sick and she needs healthcare, and you guys only spent 30 seconds on that. Maybe if we started talking about the things that people care about, then maybe those things would pass. And I said, by the way, I wrote the president a letter, and I think it reflects the sentiment of the people in my community. And I read her the letter. And then she was not there. I'm like, wait, did you hang up on me? And she didn't. She said, how old are you? And why are you still up? And I'm like, I'm 11. And she's like, well, you need to go to bed. Da, 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 da. So make a long story short, I sent that letter off to President Clinton. And shortly thereafter, the White House reached out, and the president wanted to meet me. So when he came to Philadelphia next, I was there with, at the time, Mayor Rendell, the mayor of Philadelphia, Congressman Fattah, and talked to him. And then I weaseled my way into the motorcade, and we had dinner at Zanzibar Blue. And I shared with him my mom's story about how we really needed healthcare. The other thing I shared with him is how I had an IEP, I had dyslexia along with other learning disabilities. And how it was hard to have for me to learn because I didn't have consistent teachers, the specialists that I needed to help me learn, because I was a different learner. And he said, we're going to do something about it. I said, well, you should do something about it because I want to learn. And then in his State of the Union in 1999, he talked about how he was going to invest more into quality, into teachers, and to make sure that every kid had a qualified teacher in a classroom. And then the day after his State of the Union, he landed Marine One on North Center High School's lawn with Hillary Clinton, Al Gore, and Tipper Gore, and gave a speech about his State of the Union and his investment in education in 1999. That was the first time that I saw having a conversation with an elected official can really enact change and help people. And it sparked volumes for me. And then I had a teacher at that time, Victor Bellamy, who's a Black man, the first Black man that I looked up to, really he got my attention because I was acting out in class, and he punched me dead in my chest. This was back in the day when teachers couldn't go to jail for these things. But he punched me in my chest, but he was a role model to me. He spoke to me in a way that other teachers could not. And he saw a value in me that really helped me shine, quite honestly. He saw that I wasn't a bad kid. I was a kid that learned differently and needed extra attention. He got me excited about college. You know, a lot of people see me, they remark about the orange and blue. The orange and blue is a nod to him because he went to Syracuse University, and growing up, I always wanted to be a journalist. I always wanted to tell people stories. I was writing down things and had a pen and paper. And when I found out that Syracuse University, the school where my hero went to, was also the #1 school for journalism, I made it my mission to do everything I needed to do to get to Syracuse University. And ultimately I didn't get there. That's a whole nother story. We'll go into that the next Oprah Winfrey show. But that was my first start into public service and how it happened. Then after I was at Franklin Pierce College for college, and I came home for Thanksgiving break and ran into the vice president of news for NBC, got my first big break in television. And while working at NBC, I met this guy named Joe Sestak, who was an admiral in the United States Navy and was running for Congress. And to give you a sense of frame of mind, this was around 2007. So this is when Michael Nutter was running to be mayor of the city of Philadelphia, which he ultimately won and ran. He ran and won. And so Joe Sestak kept asking me to come work for him. And I was impressed with him because he told me that he was running because his daughter had a brain tumor. And because of his service in the military for 31 years, he had TRICARE and was able to take slides of his daughter's brain around to hospitals around the country and get world-class treatment. And he was
once again, the theme of healthcare comes again into your life.
1,000%. And so he said he wanted to make sure every American had access to that quality, affordable healthcare. And so we were there during the same time that the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, was there. And Joe was a big player with that. In fact, during my time working for Congressman Sestak, we were named the most productive legislative office in the Congress by the House leadership. So Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, and the Republicans at the time, based upon the policy work that we did and the constituent service work that we did, which, by the way, our constituent service work dictated the policy we did, right? So a lot of the concerns that were flooding our office had to do with healthcare and education. So that was the work we did.
Right. I want to continue on that vein in lines with constituent services and the areas where, you know, you've really been able to make an impact in your political career. So, you know, I hear one of them being that work with Joe Sestak and being really in tune with the community and being a part of having a really high caliber engagement with the community. Can you tell us one of the other accomplishments in your political career that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, so the public service that I've done thus far, after Joe, I worked also for other members of Congress, like Congressman Fattah. I worked for Kenny Gamble, his Universal Companies, his company in Philadelphia. And then I ran for judge. And I ran for judge because my aunt was 54 at the time and diagnosed with a non-small cell squamous sarcoma, which is lung cancer. And her son was arrested during the time we transferred her from palliative care to hospice care. And he was arrested for a crime he didn't commit, was charged with over 20 felonies, 11 misdemeanors. And I was like, how in the world could this happen in 2013, 2014, that someone can get arrested? So I did research, and the work that I did prior to that showed me that we can change rules and laws. And when I looked into doing that with respect to the judicial decisions and bail reform, what I found is that judges have a tremendous amount of discretion. And instead of hampering that discretion, we should monitor it and elect judges that represent the values that we believe in, because that discretion can also be used for good. And then there was a district judge seat that opened up where I was born and raised. And so I ran for that and I won. I beat over 7 opponents and I won for that. And it wasn't enough that I took my cousin's experience with me every day to work, that though being one of 30 district judges, that we were doing it right in my courtroom. I said, what good is it if I eat if everybody else isn't eating? So I worked for the last 6 years to bring bail reform to Montgomery County, and we finally got it happen. And now bail reform is countywide in Montgomery County. I resigned February 8th. It went live a day or so prior to me resigning office. It was piloted for about 6 months, and now it's countywide. So I'm really proud of that because it's something that it was a mission for me to do, and I was able to check off that box prior to transitioning to my next assignment, which is running for state representative, to make sure that we don't have bail reform just in Montgomery County now that we bring it to the entire state. So it was good in my courtroom. Let's make it to the whole county. Now I want to bring it to the whole state.
Thank you. Bail reform is definitely a topic that, many of us have heard about, that really is unfortunate and keeps folks, behind bars and away from their families and unable to continue their livelihood. Tell us more about specifically what changes you were able to make into the bail reform procedures.
Yeah, so we have this thing, and my former colleagues would probably shift at me calling it bail reform, because one of the in our talking about conversations is that we not call it bail reform because the fear is that people will it will encourage people to, that it would be okay to do crime or whatever, this Krasner mentality, which the facts have not bared that, but that was their concern. And I'll also say this before I answer your question, is that Montgomery County, although it is going blue and is pretty progressive, the bench itself is a fairly conservative bench. Generally, when judges get there, it's hard for them to lose their job. Colonial Dems did a good did it last year, but it's very unheard of for it to unseat a judge, because they're there for 6 or 10 years and they build a good rapport with their communities and their local base. So with that being said, we have a very conservative bench. But what this does, particularly for residents in Montgomery County, and I think it's important that we set the stage and have a great baseline, because I'm not sure where everybody sits, but in Pennsylvania, if you get arrested, you can get detained up to 72 hours without even getting a phone call. Right? So as of today, you can get detained for 72 hours and not even get a phone call out. The only time you get a phone call is after you've seen a judge. So you get arrested, a cop either sees the crime or they heard of the crime. They come, they arrest you. They put you in a cell. Generally, they will ask you questions. They'll fingerprint you and all that. And then you'll see a judge. So remember, you don't get a phone call. You can just go see a judge, and a judge will set your bail. And then the information that the judge uses is whatever the judge wants, essentially. But the prosecutor, the affiant, the officer is responsible for giving the appropriate information to the judge so the judge can make the decision. Well, if the person who arrested you is the one giving the judge the decision, do you think it's going to be in favor of the defendant, or is it going to be in favor of the officer? It's naturally biased, right? But that's the way the system is currently designed. And then after the judge sets bail, if your bail is cash, say it's $100,000 cash, you can make one phone call. And then after you make that one phone call, hopefully it's to somebody that can get you the money. Otherwise, you're going to sit in jail until, your next court proceeding. With this new system, what happens is immediately after you're arrested and you get taken to the prison, you will see an intake person. That intake person will ask you a variety of questions that pertain to your ability to pay, to show up for court or your next court appearance, and also for your ability to comply with bail conditions. So they'll say, hey, do you have children? Are there children living with you? Do you own your own home? Do you have a job? Do you have a W-2? All of that information is then communicated to the judge, the prosecutor, and the public defender. I said public defender because in Montgomery County now, today, if you get arrested after seeing that intake person, the immediate person you see thereafter is a public defender. So you'll get an immediate lawyer, regardless of your income, your ability to pay or not. You get a public defender to advocate for you in your next court proceeding, which is your arraignment. Sitting across from the public defender is a district attorney. He'll get the information from the police officer, and then they have the arraignment with the district judge. So you have the public defender, you have the district attorney, you have the intake person, and the defendant. By the time the defendant has come to see the judge, they've already connected with somebody in the outside world to make sure that that person knows they're arrested. They'll make sure that if they have the ability to post bail, they have those funds guaranteed to come up. And then the judge comes in for the arraignment, and the judge that makes a decision after hearing the prosecutor and the public defender duke it out. The judge makes a decision on the bail. And let's just say that the bail is cash bail again, and the judge still gives cash bail, because sometimes it's appropriate. We don't want the murderer living next to us or the rapist, right? So sometimes jail pre-trial is important. So then if the judge sets bail, cash bail, it gets immediately reviewed the next business day by another judge, another district attorney, and another public defender to make sure that everybody is on the same page or has the ability to be heard after the dust has settled with respect to that case. This is common sense reform, and because we did it, we've seen our jail population in Montgomery County decrease by 73% for pretrials. Like, this is huge. This is huge, right?
Yeah.
People are now able to fight for their defense outside of jail than be in defense. Families are staying reunited, during things. And we're not talking about people going to jail in Montgomery County for violent crimes and stuff like that. We're talking about even petty. People were going to jail for petty, small, summary offenses, misdemeanor offenses, because their bail was $5,000. They didn't have the ability to pay. So
Great.
this is
Thank you. Yeah, that's very important. Thank you for explaining that to us in detail. It sounds like more accountability by having a broader group of folks that are involved in the decision, and more of attention to, what's best for the community and consideration for all the circumstances involved in the defendant.
1,000%. And the other point that for this is we're now getting people into treatment programs earlier. So if you come and you're afflicted with substance abuse or mental illness, which is primarily the bread and butter of what my criminal offenses were, the bottom line, the baseline of their issue was substance abuse or mental illness, we're now able to get them into treatment courts at an earlier date versus 30, 60, 90 days later on.
Great. Thank you very much. That's very critical and key that we make sure to serve the needs of the community, and particularly those that need help and resources as opposed to punitive action. I want to continue along the theme of accountability and shift gears a little bit in talking about funding in our school system. What I have here is information from the Keystone Center for Charter Change. Keystone Center for Charter Change is a Pennsylvania School Board Association, for those that may not be aware. And their goal is to build support for the development and enactment of legislation to provide regulatory and funding changes to the charter school law. One of the issues that they raise is particularly around special education funding. Funding follows the student, and the average rate for special education funding has been reported to be $4,000. However, charter schools are provided the same amount of funds as the public school is provided to educate students. The imbalance comes in the fact that public schools educate 95% of the highest need special education students. So if charter schools are allotted the same amount, and if their rate is roughly $4,000, in the fourth column where you see premium over estimated cost, it's reported that Colonial School District then is overspending by $19,000 for those services. So I raised this question, and we will continue to talk about the various issues in the education system, but particularly speaking around the issue of funding, equitable funding, and accountability to ensure that students are receiving these services that are being paid for. What is your perspective as to how we can create better transparency and also more equitable funding in our both public and charter schools?
Great. Well, it's a great question. In my role as a legislator, a state legislator, what I will be doing is making sure we advocate that the state pays its fair share of funding. Right now, the state is only paying 1/3 on most estimates of their allocated fund. And if the state is able to pay their fair share of funding, one, I think a couple things could happen. The property taxes, it could affect our property taxes, right, dramatically. Property taxes can be dropped or reduced, possibly, if the school district that is there or the LEA chooses to do it. But more importantly, I think it's incredibly important that we do it because there are people that move to neighborhoods for schools. I think that, and there are some people that are trapped in their in their neighborhoods and don't have access to a quality school. I'm happen to believe that every child deserves a quality education, regardless of their race, regardless of their zip code, and regardless of their IEP status, right? And I'm fortunate that I had access to opportunities in elementary school. I had a great principal by the name of Carl Glover, and I had a great teacher by Donna Freeman who saw that I had a learning disability when I was in first and second grade, and decided to make sure that I had access to a different resource. And they quite honestly didn't have the tools to meet my IEP there. And I found a school called Plymouth Meeting Friends School in Plymouth, which you may have heard of, in Butler Pike. And I thrived there. I had a great education. And then I went back to my public school where you heard the story about Mr. Bellamy. And so I'm a product of quality education, a variety of different educations. And I think it's important that we approach it, that there's not a one size fit all approach to this. And funding is the common thread against all of these things when it comes to education. And the state simply isn't doing their fair share when you look at it. Even if you take, for example, the special ed funding, and you said, hey, states, the Pennsylvania, you guys created the charter school law. Since you guys thought it was a great idea, why doesn't the state fund it, right? Or we know that special education is so important and vitally important. If we don't, and I see Gail Plant there, your face just chopped up on my thing. And if we don't fully, you made me lose my name. What's the name? I can't think of the thing that I'm trying to say. If you can't, not remediate, what's the word that we use to service someone's IEP? I can't think of it, but there's a word, I can't think of it. But if you can't service that IEP, or you have an IEP that's particularly difficult, if the state could fully fund special education alone, right? And we could allocate that to the state. But at the end of the day, what the state needs to do is follow the formula that's in place at a bare minimum, and make sure that we fund public education to the level that the state is supposed to, the level that the General Assembly allotted to, and they're not doing that. So that's number one.
I think the concern is if we continue to fund charter schools the same way that we're funding public schools without the level of oversight and school boards that the public schools have, then there's money that's being pulled out of the public schools. So the concern is, how do we ensure that the money that is being allocated for students outside of the public schools, which they rightfully need, and it's their choice to have, that students are getting, the full value for the funds that are being allocated?
Well, I think the premise of your question, where you're saying, I think there needs to be accountability across the board in public schools and in public charter schools, because charter schools are public schools as well. So there needs to be the same level of accountability with any taxpayer dollars. And I don't think that there should be a double standard with respect to the way funds are audited, or with respect to the way that the funds are distributed. And I think if you looked at funding and the audits that are done on public schools, there are some deficits. And if you look at the way that funds are being audited with respect to charter schools, there are some deficits, right? So let's start with the simple fact that, there needs to be more accountability. Let's also start with the fact that there is inequity in the system, right? There is a built-in inequity in the system. The fact that a cyber charter school can get the same amount of money has a charter school that is a brick and mortar, right? That just doesn't make sense. Like, that's a common sense reform that everybody can agree on, right? The special education dollar. I mean, this isn't brainiac. And I think sometimes what happens is people go into these conversations and they're saying, hey, I'm pro charter, I'm anti-charter, or whatever. What we need to do is just say, we're pro quality public education. We're pro reforms that need to be made because the system needs to the system needs to be reformed. The public school code was written in 1948. The charter school law was written in 1997. The public school code, it was written in 1948 when I wasn't even allowed in the conference room when they were having those conversations. So there's no.
So how do we correct these?
Say again.
How do we correct these old laws and provide fair funding?
Comprehensive.
How do you propose to do that?
Comprehensive reform, right? And it starts with the Democrats taking the the House, right? We're 12 seats away. I would be one of those 12 seats if we get there. We've got to hold Republicans accountable for the work that they failed to do in fully funding our schools, right? We have to get back the House so that the governor not only is just a veto governor, but the governor is an empowering governor, empowering him to make those decisions. The fact of the matter is right now, we have excess funds from ARPA that can be given into education, but it's being stymied by the Republican legislature. The General Assembly is stymieing this legislation. Every time the governor presents any type of reforms, it's stymied. So the first that we got to do is get there and win, right? We got to get there and make sure that we have the number that's necessary to win. And I think the second step is, after we do it, the legislature has to have the courage to take this on. I mean, education is a very complex issue and involves personal choice and personal decisions. And traditionally, the legislature has been anemic when it comes to those types of things. So I won't be, because it's incumbent upon the constituents that I serve, because it dramatically affects a big portion of our district. So I have to be in this conversation.
Thank you. Continuing along the idea of the current state, which is that Democrats don't have the majority in the House, how would you deal with the challenge of working in that environment? And what experience do you have in bringing folks of different backgrounds, particularly of another party, along in decisions and getting those bills on the floor? And how do you think that you would get those bills on the floor and passed?
Yeah, great question. I think this is one area that really uniquely sets me apart from my opponent, right? Is that in the last 6 years as a district judge, my first year as a district judge, I was appointed to the Special Court Judges Association of Pennsylvania, which is essentially the board that oversees all 530 district judges across the state. I was appointed to the Legislative Affairs Committee. I was also appointed to the Strategic Planning Commission, ultimately as the vice chairman up until I resigned. A part of my duties and responsibilities was to represent the judges across the state and the legislature, and also to the Supreme Court. One of the things I heard about when I first came on is the safety and security of judges. And little did I know that it would hit home, close to home. As you know, on December 21st, 2015, I was elected as the first Black district judge in Montgomery County and the youngest sitting judge in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That's the thing that everybody reads on the bio and they clap for, and it sounds great. But what they also don't tell you is that I was the first judge to receive 24-hour sheriff's protection because of the color of my skin. I received racial epithets that have been well documented in local newspapers, the N-word on my parking space, my reserved parking space at work, and a noose hanging above my entrance, right? And so when you go out and you interact with people, we don't have the same level of security. And so one of the concerns that judges had, and we also had a judge who had a gun pulled on him when they went to door knock, we created a legislation that would help put that judge's safety not at risk as it is right now, as it was back then. So we created that legislation, we shepherded through the committees, and we got it passed, and it is now a law signed by Governor Wolf. We've also, under my tutelage, we've passed more changes and amendments to the motor vehicle law through committee all the way up to passage and signed by Governor Wolf than has been done in the last 20 years. So I have a unique perspective in that I work with people that are Republicans and Democrats all the time. And I actually have gotten things passed out of this body of legislation. What it comes down to, quite frankly, is being able to have conversations with people, sitting across from the person that doesn't look like you, that doesn't come from the same neighborhood as you, building that rapport, building that relationship, and getting things done. But also making sure that you don't forget who you are in those conversations to get those things passed. I can't hear you.
The magic mute button. Great, thank you very much. So we'd like to continue with the conversation and talk about policing and the amount of disciplinary actions that are brought against African-American students in our school district. So what's shown here is data that was compiled by Liza Maris, Secretary of the NAACP of Cheltenham, of which Plymouth Meeting is a part. And Liza's conducted this research across Montgomery County to look at the percent of school suspensions that were given to Black students, and also the percentage of the student population that is Black. So what's shown here is Plymouth White Marsh High School with 236 suspensions. This data was compiled from self-reporting by the schools from a number of different sources cited below. And the time period is from 2017 to 18. And that was what was available at the time that this report was run. And what you see here is that in that time period, of those 236 suspensions, roughly 30% were African-American students. However, African-American students only make up roughly 15% of the population. So with that, there's roughly 5 African-American students are likely to experience a suspension or a disciplinary action roughly 5 times the rate of white students or non-Black students. And this is a concern because when students are harshly disciplined, it definitely is something that their friends see. It is demotivating for them. It emphasizes stigmas, and it can continue to produce negative behaviors. At the same time, it's also preventing that student from getting the full experience of their education and from really thriving in that environment. So the question I have for you is, what are some ideas that you have at the state level that we could do to really address this issue that permeates throughout Montgomery County of the high level of discipline that our Black students experience?
Yeah, so I became familiar with this issue intimately as a judge, because one of the things we had in the schools that I have a jurisdiction over is we had cops in schools, and it was supposed to be a community relations program. And what often happened is I was getting summary citations for fights, and I'm like, wait, when I was in school and there was a fight or an argument, I got a detention or a suspension. So why is this kid getting arrested? And I thought you were there for police community relations. How are we building police community relations? And this is happening. And so we dug into that issue, and I found out some of the startling statistics that you found, that it wasn't just that they were getting summary citations, but they were also getting suspended. So they were getting suspended and they were coming to court. So they're getting double whammy, right? It's like, whoa, this makes no sense. How has this happened? This is unconscionable. And so what we did was we made sure that there were MOUs. And as a judge, I couldn't do this, but we could make sure we had the conversations with the right people. So we'd make sure there's established MOUs between the police departments when they're in there and the students. But I think to get to the heart of your issue is we need to incentivize from a state level, the same way we just did with nurses, incentivize from the state level to make sure that the representation on the staff and at the administration level is reflective of the population it's representing, right? And I think it's my understanding you guys have one Asian educator and one African-American educator in the entire district. Is that correct, Sonia?
Yes, from my experience and observation.
Yeah.
Sorry, 2. I'm aware of another African-American female. So we're up to 2 African-Americans, 1 male, 1 female, and 1 Asian educator.
Got it. And
in the
so
Colonial School District.
I think what's incredibly important is we've got to make sure from a state level that we incentivize more African-American and more just a diversity of teachers in the pipeline, and make sure we have a good pipeline. I think the other thing that we've got to do is make sure that we include teachers of color in the hiring process, provide ongoing professional development, cultural competencies to support those teachers effectively, and incentivize retention for those professionals, right? And I think once we get that in there and we incentivize folks and make sure that it's possible for them to come and get their master's and all those things and incentivize it that way, it'll help permeate the schools and the school districts. I think the other thing we've got to do from a state level, from a legislative standpoint, I mean, that's from a legislative standpoint. From a political standpoint, on my job as a politician in campaigning, I think it's incredibly important that we build a bench that's reflective of our community and where it's going, right? So that means making sure that because this legislative process is long, it doesn't happen overnight, and I only have 2 years a term, right? So I got to make sure on the flip side, simultaneously, that we're making sure we recruit candidates to run for school board, the highest paid office in the land. I see a couple of them that are joking at that, but they're not the highest paid, but we can recruit good candidates, help them campaign, right? So as I'm out there every day campaigning and raising money, making sure that we build, create a form system to make sure we have candidates on the school board that are reflective of the diversity of our community, so that we can make sure that the values of the school board and the superintendent and the administration trickles its way all the way down to the school buildings. But those are the two ideas that I have that I've been working with.
Great, thank you. That is very key. You know, I speak from the perspective of a parent. You know, my children have been in the Colonial School District from elementary school. I have a high schooler, rising high schooler, rising fourth grader, and a young African-American male. And it's unfortunate for all of our students, regardless of their ethnic background, to not see diversity reflected in their teaching staff as they would see in their community.
1,000%.
I appreciate your attention to that.
Look at this, right? So I brought up Victor Bellamy, and I swayed it to him hitting me in my chest about something. Not saying that teachers should do that. That's not what I'm promoting. However, what I am saying is that there's a way that he could talk to me that others could not, because of his cultural competency, right? And it doesn't mean that he's better or worse than anyone else. It just means that he built a rapport with me that he could grip me up. He could grab me to say, yo, pay attention, or blah, 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 right? And I think we just got to make sure that we fuse that into our system. And I think the other thing is, I know now, because I'm an African-American candidate who's running for political office, we've got to make sure that we fund candidates that are reflective. And unfortunately, I'm not a big fan of our political system the way it is. It costs a lot of money. I've spent $50,000 of my own personal money on my campaign thus far, right? It's a lot of money to run for office, and that can deter a lot of good people who want to get involved, right? Not only is it financial, then you got to deal with the tax and all that kind of stuff. So I think as a person who's in the political sphere, helping to make it easier for school board candidates that are reflective of the values and the belief system of our community get into office is incredibly important.
Yep, we are very proud of our diverse school board here in Colonial. Very proud of our school board members.
I hear they make good trouble.
Exactly. To the audience, we are going to start to open up for questions. Please type your questions in the chat. They will come directly to me. I will field them and share them with Mr. Scott. The last question that I have is around homelessness. CAARSEA has a longstanding program where we set up in Norristown, at the Norristown train station, and we provide some of the basic necessities to our homeless community members. And this includes meals, toiletries, and clothing. What we found is that there's really a lack of a concerted effort around resources for the houseless population, and that beyond the Band-Aid of the needs for the day, we're really looking for how do we get people under a roof, into a home, and on their feet. What are some ideas that you have that could be done at a state level to make housing more affordable, first of all, but also to really help those that have been displaced to find housing again?
Oh, thank you for this. This is another one of my passion projects, if you will, an area that I'm incredibly passionate about. I volunteer at the Norristown Hospitality Center. If you guys haven't heard of it, shameless plug, please look them up. They are doing literally God's work on the earth and helping folks. As a district judge, I was responsible for evictions. And there were opportunities where the rules and the law said that this person needed to be evicted, although I recognize that they were a victim of their circumstance. And life happens to people, Sonia, at a pace sometimes that they cannot, handle and grapple with. And so we had a case, particularly, this is the one that really started my interest in it. There was a young lady who could not have children because she had some female issues, and then ultimately she got pregnant. Her and her spouse were working minimum wage jobs. And because she got pregnant and had issues, she was deemed a high risk pregnancy. So after that, they put her on bed rest and she could not work. So her job did not give her paid family medical leave. Her job didn't give her even, quite frankly, health care. And so she had to go out, get unemployed. And now they went from 2 incomes with really 1 income because they're 2 minimum wage jobs down to half an income, if you will. And I was forced to evict her. And I was like, this is crazy. So of course we did everything that we could do to help her, get her on her feet and all this other kind of stuff. But we had to look at this and how do we help this? And so we came up with this program, and it was actually a group of people and that came up with the county commissioner at the time. Well, she still is, Valerie Kush was the leader of it, but and it's called EPIC. And what it does is it helps people who are facing eviction due to no fault of their own. And it brings together private and public dollars to help them pay their back rent, pay the next rent for 75 and then 50% and then 25 to get them on their start, make sure they have a savings cooped up, right? That's the big thing. And so we got that expanded to my court. Now it's expanded into 15 courts across Montgomery County. Big win. The second thing we need to do is the problems of that are plaguing the homelessness population, especially prior to Hurricane Ida, is mental illness and substance abuse, right? That is the disease. And that disease is plaguing our criminal justice system. It's plaguing our homelessness population, and we've got to fix it. We are not investing the dollars that we need to do. We're closing more buildings at the state hospital instead of creating opening and welcome spaces. So what we need to do is have a comprehensive approach to make sure we fully fund mental health services. We've got to remove this stigma around getting help for mental health and mental illness, right? We've got to also allow for folks that are uninsured and underinsured to get the quality substance abuse treatment that they need to detox appropriately and to have a free and clear mind to make rational decisions for themselves. And then we also got to do, at the same time while we're doing that, helping them get treatment for themselves, is we got to make sure that we invest in programs like first-time home buyers program. Also programs that allow people who are second chance or returning people, returning citizens, to get housing, right? We got to build quality, affordable housing because right now there's just simply not enough. Right now in Montgomery County on May 16th, they're going to empty out the hotels that are the people that are still in the hotels from Hurricane Ida. And we're going to have more homeless because the county's running out of money. They can't keep paying for their hotels. And the people don't want to stay in the hotel, but there's just no apartments. You can't get an apartment at the rate that they were paying pre-COVID for $800, $900 a month to afford a quality apartment anymore. So we've got to build affordable housing. We also have to raise the minimum wage so that people can have a working wage, a dignified wage, so if they had a good job, a good wage, they could afford to live in more than just a room. Right. And so it's a multi-pronged issue that requires a multi-pronged approach, and something that I'm very vested in and have a lot of passion about. And so I think all of those things need to happen. And I think you're right. You hit the nail on the head. I don't mind going down to the hospitality center or to the transportation center and doing it, but it is such a Band-Aid. And if we don't have people with the political courage to stand up and to fight for these things, we'll continue to see what we're seeing. I'm the guy who went down to Eisenhower during the flood and pulled out homeless people. I don't know if you know, in Norristown, one of the solutions that they had was to give homeless people tents. The Your Way Home program. They have people living in tents along the river in Norristown today. You can go down there and look. And we have people that are dying when it floods because they call that place their home. I had to pull a woman out there last year. So I know this issue, and I have a passion to fix it because I don't want to pull another one of those young women out because she refused to leave. Right? People are dying out here. And for people to build a $400 million courthouse and leave these folks and not pay attention to the real issue is really unconscionable. And I think they're going to have to answer for that to whatever higher power they believe in.
Great.
And I'll stop before I get in trouble.
No, thank you so much. Your passion is something that people want to know about, and I'm looking at the questions in the chat, and that's one of them. We talked about a lot of issues tonight, but if you had to think about the two that you're most passionate about and why, we just got about 6 or 7 more minutes before we wrap up and tell folks more about how to connect with you following this program. But want to get at a couple of these questions from the chat. So what would be the 2 issues that you're most passionate about and why, if you just had to pick 2?
Education and healthcare. If we can provide folks with a quality education, if we can make sure, I mean, it to me, my mom worked for 29 years at one organization that I'm not going to name, but she worked for 29 years, was laid off in November, and essentially kicked out of the door, right? And her healthcare, getting her through that the state system, the penny system, was horrible. It was egregious. First of all, you've got to talk to the computer. You can't even pick up the phone to call someone. You got to dial a million numbers just to get to a human being. You can't go to a physical office just to get healthcare. And to see her go through that process, and to see my mom have to make a decision about whether or not she should go to the doctors or pay her light bill. This is 2022. What country are we living in? We just sent how much money to Ukraine, and Ukraine needs it. I'm not taking away from that. But I'm saying, how come we can't invest at least a portion of that money into our healthcare system? It just blows my mind. So education
access to healthcare and reducing healthcare costs.
1,000%. Access to quality, affordable healthcare, comprehensive healthcare, healthcare that includes mental health coverage, that includes substance abuse treatment, right? Education and healthcare, I believe, are our 2 solutions to help America regain its footing. We are the greatest. I don't want to take a point, but I feel like sometimes we're doing ourselves a disservice when we don't make investments in the right places, like investing in our people and our human capital. And those are the 2 of the easiest ways where the data shows that it pays dividends. If we can get universal pre-K, right? Like, I mean, all the data suggests all of this, right? So education and healthcare are 2 of my biggest things.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. Given today's news that Roe versus Wade issues are going to come to states' rights, what are some, I lost it, give me a minute.
Yeah.
I want to get it right.
Yeah.
What do you plan to do to assure reproductive freedom for people in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, prior to me joining here tonight, I had to go in the city, and I was in the city for an endorsement interview with a couple labor unions. And after the unions, I stopped over to City Hall for the Roe versus Wade rally. And it honestly, to see that many people out there advocating and expressing their voice for what is happening right now, it brought me great joy to know that we have people still out there. However, this is a threat, a looming threat that if you guys read the opinion, which I did, I stayed up last night reading it. I was just like, I was aghast. Choice is a very personal issue for many, and I understand and I respect that. But that impending decision from the Supreme Court is about control, and the government has no business telling a woman or anyone else what they can and cannot do with their bodies. And that is what I believe. And that is how, if I'm elected, and that's how I will legislate if I'm elected. It's very interesting to me that the other side gets pretty damn passionate when it comes to anything happening in someone's bedroom or in their doctor's office. But anything else, they want their own personal freedoms. They want the government out, small government. I want my personal rights. I want my personal freedoms. But when it comes to LGBTQ, or when it comes to a woman's right to choose her health care appropriately, they have a lot of darn say. And so I take a page out of Nancy Pelosi's playbook. When you've had 5 children in 6 years, then you can have a conversation with me about taking away a woman's right to choose.
Thank you. The last question that
You're asking me all the hot button. I'm going to lose so many voters tonight.
No, thank you for your candor and for covering, just all aspects of these issues. As you know,
the hate crime question too.
Yes, I do. And I'm going to see if I can squeeze both of them in, because I did say that we would cover hate crimes. I want to get one more question from the audience before I go there. And this is around the statement around trying to increase the pool or make it easier for candidates to run for office, particularly women and African American candidates or candidates from underrepresented groups. And so the question is, what are some reforms that you support or would propose to make running for office in PA easier?
Great question. As a person in the process right now, I have a lot of gripes. How much time do you have? No, seriously. One, I think the reason, let's start with the baseline of the reason why this seat was created is because our legislature is not reflective of the actual population, right? So they said, hey, there's a lot more Black people and Latino people in this state, but our legislature doesn't look like that. I think we should do something about that, right? And it took bold leadership, particularly from, and I know you said Mary Jo represented a part of the district. The other part of the district was also represented by a guy by the name of Matt Bradford, who's the appropriations chair and had a lot to say with respect to redistricting. And he was the face for the Democrats in the room when those conversations were being had. And he advocated for seats like these and the principles of these seats to make sure that minorities could be represented and reflected in the legislature. So one, we stand on that. The second thing I'll say is that it's hard out here to run for office. And now I see why good people don't do it, because it's the Democrats, quite in my opinion, and again, you're getting me in trouble, but the Democrats have been the least helpful, sometimes. I think they muddy it more than they need to, at least from not a national thing, but this Democrats as a whole, it has been incredibly problematic for just various political reasons. But I think that we've got to do what I said I'm going to do, is I'm going to create a PAC to help raise money for folks to win, good people, right? Like I want to make sure that people that are serving on the city councils and serving on the school boards and serving alongside of me in the legislature are reflective of the values. And I also think it's important that when people aren't holding up to their end of the bargain, or they make you a promise and they don't commit it, that we have the tools and the resources to make sure that we have people on the bench to replace them. And that includes me. I'm not off limits. If I don't deliver, by all means, run somebody else, or I may not run again. But I think it's incredibly important that we hold people accountable. And one of the ways that we hold people accountable in this country is through our vote and through the political process.
Great. Thank you so very much. We covered a lot tonight, and I got to thank you so much for,
Sorry for the long-winded answer.
No, I thank you for the detail that you provided. This is an opportunity for the community to hear from you, hear what you think the concerns are, and also hear how you're going to address what we've identified as some of the pressing issues. I want to remind our audience about some very important primary dates. We've passed May 2nd, last day to register to vote. So I hope you nudged your neighbors, friends, recently turned 18-year-olds and got them registered to vote for the primaries. For those that are registered, May 10th is the last day to apply for a mail-in or absentee ballot. You can take those directly to any ballot drop box. You don't have to wait till Election Day. And then May 17th, very important day. That is the day that you can walk into the polls and vote, or your absentee or mail-in ballot must be received by 8 p.m. at your county election office. Greg Scott has a number of ways that you can reach him and learn about what he's doing. I have here his Instagram page, also his web page is below. Greg, tell the community about any upcoming events that you have coming up.
Great question. We have some stuff. The easiest way to find out is on my social media at Greg Scott PA. The telephone number to reach me is 610-467-4626. I do answer the phone. I may not answer it when you call, but I will definitely get back to you. And the best way to reach me is via email, vote@gregscottpa.com or greg@gregscottpa.com. I'm pretty responsive via email. So if you send me an email, that's the best way to get to me. We're going to be doing a series of events in the last 14 days. We have 13 days actually after today. The other thing I'll mention to you, Sonia, is you're right about the mail-in ballots. We're getting close to the deadline. So folks who are getting their mail-in ballots this week, and if you haven't returned it by Friday, I would implore you to please use one of our secure Dropbox locations. If you go to gregscottpa.com/vote vote. You'll find all those locations. The closest one in our area is at right across from the post office in Norristown at Erie and DeKalb Street. It's 24 hours. It's secure. There's a camera there. There's security watching it 24/7. So you can go, just drive up, roll your window down, stick your ballot in the mail. It's the easiest way to make sure your vote is counted. So after Friday, if you haven't returned your ballot, please don't mail it. Go to one of the secure drop boxes. And of course, if you haven't gotten it mailed by May 17th, please get out to vote. Polls open at 7 a.m. and they close at 8 p.m., 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Please make a plan today to go ahead and vote. Again, Greg Scott at Greg Scott PA on all social media platforms. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate this opportunity.
You are welcome. Thank you for being with us. If you missed our prior recorded forum where we posed the same questions to candidate Rochelle Colbreth, you can follow us on our Facebook pages at CAARSEA.com on the website. And also it will be posted in the chat how you can access that recording as well as this recording so you can replay that. I also want to share that Teresa Brown Paris has a program weekly, Good Morning Conchi, covers excellent local news and topics. She also did a roundtable, both candidates, different questions. So it's really important to hear from the candidates as often as possible so that you can hear about their take on the various different issues. Some questions were not covered tonight that were covered in Teresa Brown Paris's program. So please make sure that you engage with those platforms. And then I mentioned all the various means that you can find CAARSEA, that you can join our work that we do in the community, any of our learning series that we do, or just the dialogue that we have on our Facebook group. Once again, Greg, thank you so much for your time this evening. Thank you for the conversation and the engagement. Thank you all, audience, for joining us tonight. It is very much appreciated. And I wish you all a wonderful evening. Best of luck on your run for office. And we look forward to working with you further, Greg.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good night. Thank you.
Good night, all.